It's hot, hot, hot here in Tokyo. In fact, it's been a record-breaking summer. And Japanese people are finding some relief through indoor activities. This theme park, Immersive Fort Tokyo, has more than a dozen attractions, keeping locals and tourists entertained and away from the boiling heat. Theme parks, in fact, have had a major boom after the pandemic lockdowns, but recently, with rising inflation and dwindling Chinese spending, that's kept their businesses under pressure. With Japanese real wages turning positive for the first time in more than 2 years, we'll be watching whether consumers continue to open their wallets for these unique experiences.
Thank you so much for joining us today and welcoming us to your theme park. I want to start by asking you about Japanese consumption, because we've heard a lot of concerns about how households are not spending, especially with rising prices. What are you seeing in terms of consumption on entertainment?
Live entertainment itself, especially theme park business, it's representing most of the live entertainment business. It's growing. In the past 10 years, except for COVID-19 period, we are every year, in average, 8% growing. So people may say, that Japan population stagnant and consumption stagnant, the cheap yen, maybe consumption gonna be declining or plunging, Overall, maybe slightly consumption is declining, but entertainment is growing. That's a fact. And especially theme park business is growing very rapidly, and mainly driven by the Universal Studios Japan, growing from 2010, 11. They are growing.
Which, of course, you helped turn around that business. But you mentioned the cheap yen, which is, of course, why it's really attracting foreign visitors, right? But at the same time, I realized this theme park is mostly in Japanese. So how are you trying to capture that market?
Foreign visitors, maybe we're riding on the two waves. One, of course, cheap yen, but they are coming more. But more like that, Japan as a brand, I think you may know Davos forum. Japan is always rated, the number one or one of the top of most attractive, tourism value we have as a tourism asset. We are very much strong. So lots of people want to visit Japan. That's one thing. So they are growing. And so in order to capture those waves, we as a marketer, we really would like to strike the moment that they want to make a decision. When they are considering visiting Japan or other countries, or then visit Japan, where to visit. That's basically 4 to 6 months in advance to their visit. So the period we are reaching to them when they are staying in a domestic country, we really want to touch and reach lots of digital communications.
What's your strategy in attracting Chinese visitors at a time when their economy doesn't seem to be doing very well?
Right, and we cannot change the Chinese momentum itself, right? What we can do is we really messaging via their friends living in Japan. And they are using lots of blog and Instagram, X, and there are lots of information they are sending to their people in China, right? And we really would like to invite them. For example, this park inviting lots of those Chinese bloggers, those key influencers, and through them we really touching to Japanese visiting, considering those Chinese consumers. So that's the most efficient way. But the point is, of course, generally speaking, recession or cheap yen, whatever, some people may come more or less. However, people are choosing the place, which is most favorable, most preferable, the options always. So what we can do is, regardless, the inbound or domestic tourists, I think, most important thing is just create a valuable experience and communicate that value to the people in advance to their visit.
How are you choosing then some of the brands that you want to partner with? Because some of these big names are not necessarily cheap.
Right. And the key is how we can find and talk and collaborative relationship we're going to build before they are being superstar, right? So that we basically, using simply, we just statistically, choose, which brand, contents brand, intellectual property, those contents, what are you interested in? We are broadly serving every quarter we are doing, and some new one rising, right? We are watching a new one, and we check that those fan, how much they're gonna be spending, spending per cap. If we find not so much well known yet, but also one individual fan is spending more than average, like 10 times more than average. This may be having the potential. Now we're watching them and monitoring them. They are rising and growing. Then knocking door. We believe you have the very good potential, and we can be a good partner with. And basically, we should be the first one to talk to them, and that will be the strategy.
Also, it's been really interesting to see your strategy for Japanese people, because they're not necessarily known to be the most outgoing. So how do you bring them out of their shells in these very live experiences?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I think for people who know the brand, that's going to be super fun. But the key is, if theme park is built an attraction, which is very interesting, only talking to the fan, that's failure. What key is, even if those people who come not knowing the brand, but still having, big excitement, that's the way we should be shooting for. So in order to do that, we rely on the IP, but also fundamentally, what we should be relying on the instinct and general instinct of the human being, striking that moment, So there's some typical stereotype or prototype in their brain, right? So those scene by scene, we choose, which only appealing to those fans or appealing to more than a fan. We prefer appealing more than fan.
I think one of the most appealing things, in fact, is the fact that this is indoors at a time when we're experiencing one of the most record-breaking summer heat. Is that helping your business?
Yes, I would say yes, because unexpectedly, especially this summer, it's more than heat. It's crazy, right? And those consumers feel risk to go outside, but air condition, whole day, very comfortable. That's compared to those outside big facilities. They're always concerned. Oh, is that okay? Too much heat? Oh, Immersive Fort Tokyo is indoor. It's advantageous for us. Yes.
Junglia, though, it's going to be outdoors. It has lots of jungle experiences, opening in Okinawa next year. The location seems to be pretty strategic. How much demand do you expect from Chinese travelers, Southeast Asian travelers, and just domestic tourists?
For the year one, the awareness of the park newly developed, taking a little bit more time, right? So I think year one will be majority comes from domestic tourists. That's our expectation. And but year two, year three, year four, beyond, those awareness is more penetrating to the outside of Japan, and the tourism will be choosing our park as a destination. So year one, I think it's probably less than 10% or maybe 20%, inbound portion might be reality. But year three, year four, gradually increasing, and for example, 10 years later after the grand opening, probably half will be coming from outside of Japan. That's our prediction.
Is that also part of factoring in the prediction that the Chinese economy will get better in a few years?
Not necessarily. I'm not an optimistic person. Even having the some pessimistic assumption of the Chinese economy, because we cannot control, right? We always market has to plan for the conservatism. So we assume probably the kind of recession gonna be. But still, there are lots of people from Thailand and especially Taiwan and Singapore, Vietnam, lots of Korea, lots of countries watching Japan as a destination, and Okinawa too.
Mostly because of a cheap yen as well. Do you have a yen assumption for the next few years?
Yeah, our yen assumption is built on when yen were 135 yen. Okay. So still conservative.
Conservative.
Yeah, and we have two more scenarios. If the yen becomes more than 110, stronger yen. Now the cheaper yen is 160 scenario. That was our maybe not. Maybe it's impossible 160. But yesterday 160, right? So, but for example, that's good for us. 164. If we talk about Jangria itself, cheaper yen helps. But those are who knows, right? So we think regardless yen price, but in the range, I think 50% should be inbound people should be contributing to the total annual attendance. That will be our scenario. In order to achieve that, we should be creating the value of the consumer in terms of experience and communicating what the value throughout lots of direct to consumers method.
Do external investors look at Janglia and say we want to put more money as the yen gets weaker and become a little bit more cautious with the yen strength?
Good question. I think it's more, but our stakeholders quite sharing the same vision. This Janglia, they are strategic stakeholders thinking more like a longer term. So if they are not so much strolling because of the yen, I hope so. Key point I want to highlight is, just don't be deceived by just a number of population of a general, recession. But looking at the Japanese market, because of the attractiveness of the country brand itself, Japan. The other one is a lot of sleeping asset of IP. Japan has lots of Pokemon, number one brand in the world, stronger than Mickey Mouse. Okay, and the second one, Hello Kitty. It's number 2 popular brand in the world. More popular than Mickey Mouse. Those are sleeping assets here, right? And Japanese entertainment industry is not about only domestic consumption. It's about pulling inbound so that growing 8% every year in past 10 years. So I think Japanese entertainment, especially theme park business, will be very much attractive in terms of investment opportunity. That's my opinion.